Hey, what's up, Mission? Man, honored to be hanging out this morning with, or actually this afternoon with Jordan Rice, who is one of my favorite people in the world. Him and his wife Jessica live in Harlem, New York. That's a little bit different than Ventura, California. So he's the pastor of Renaissance. They have two amazing boys. We've been friends. Well, I've been friends with you, Jordan, for probably longer than you've been friends with me. But I've been friends with Jordan and been a fan of him for years. He's one of the leaders in Orchard Group that helps plant churches along the East Coast and all around the world. And he helps lead the New York movement of that. I deeply respect him, and me and Jody have been friends with him and Jess over 7 years now, I think. So, and known each other longer than that. But been next to each other for a while. So he's spoken at Mission, deeply respect him. So I just wanted to get on a call and chat with Jordan because I have a lot to learn from him always. But so, hey, Jordan, welcome. Thanks for doing this. And
Thanks for having me.
Maybe even a little bit of your story of how you became a pastor. So, or your journey.
Yes, definitely. So I grew up kind of going to church. My parents had a couple of rules in our house. One of those rules was go to church every Sunday morning. And growing up, I never in a billion years would have thought I would be a pastor, or, I thought that one day I'd be 50 and then I'd be a church trustee. I grew up at a kind of old school Black Baptist church and went to college. And for the first time, I did not have to go to church, and I took that freedom and ran with it.
That's never happened before. No one's ever done that before.
Yeah, it's a very unique story. And sophomore year in college, really had a coming to faith. And life kind of got flipped upside down, started following Jesus. But I grew up in a household full of lawyers. So my older brother ended up going to law school. My parents are both attorneys. They had their own law firm. And growing up, whenever there was an argument, my mother would tell us, my mother, who's also a judge or just retired, she would say, all right, counselor, you have 15 minutes, prepare your argument. And you go to a room and you prepare an argument, and, you present it to the judge, and whether it was about why you should get a new pair of sneakers or whatever the case was. So that was kind of the household I grew up in. So I knew I was going to be a lawyer. And going to law school, I realized pretty quickly that I could not do that until I was 65 or whatever age retirement is. And I started to think about, what does ministry look like for me? I had been teaching a Bible study in college, and I loved that. And in law school, started teaching Bible studies. And I always just start ministries of different things all the time, and they would grow pretty quickly, and I would connect with people. But I never knew that you could do that as like a full-time profession, that you can there were organizations and people that would help you start a church from scratch. And about 6 years ago, we did that in Harlem, me and my wife and a group of amazing people. And so we started Renaissance about coming up on 6 years ago, and it's been a roller coaster, but it's been pretty amazing.
Yeah, we understand that. So, meaning like that's Mission story too. So I've been to Renaissance. It's like, guys, it is probably one of my favorite worship experiences that I've ever experienced. I went in, it's kind of like a secret shopper, just hanging out in Harlem and wanting to hang with Jordan and his team. And I was like, this is incredible. So I love it. Meeting a school. I love everything about it. So great. And so the reason I wanted to just chat with you, Jordan, and the reason that we set this up is I clearly am a white pastor that grew up in Oklahoma, which would be the Midwest and the South, depending on how you want to argue it. And then I live in California, which is completely different than the East Coast and the urban center that you live in, pastor in, and grew up in. And I'm white. I don't want that to be a shock to you. But we have a mutual love of like Jesus and the church and each other and Jordan's and The Last Dance and all of that. So I'm trying to figure out, like, I just wanted you to help me process like frustration around racism and Jesus people, and how do we, like, if we're following Jesus, like, how is this still happening? And as a way that maybe we could come, like me as a white guy, I could come to you and be like, teach me up, coach me up. How do we help this be done? Or how do I help lead people? Or what would you want to say to Mission? Or what are you talking about with your people? Like, so, and again, I may say something ignorant or insensitive, but that is not my hope. So just have grace for me and coach me up.
Of course.
So please. Yeah.
Yeah, man. First, I would say frustration is the entrance into calling. So whenever you think about even calling in scripture, a lot of times before God makes us aware of what he wants us to do, he first has to just tick us off. And, everybody who's been to any vacation Bible school has heard the story of Moses, and Moses hears the voice of God speaking to him through this burning bush and tells him to let old Pharaoh, go to old Pharaoh, tell him, let my people go. The most important thing about that calling is actually in Genesis 2, or Exodus 2, not Genesis, Exodus 2 and 3. A chapter before, you see what was happening in Moses' life that allowed him to receive God's call to do something. So Exodus 2, Moses is outside on the balcony. He's chilling out and he sees one of his own people being beaten by an Egyptian. So he runs down and he kills the dude, buries him in the sand. That's a bad idea to do, to take injustice into your own hands. And you see Moses traveling for decades as a result of his overreaction. However, the most important thing about that is before God spoke to Moses in a burning bush, God first lit Moses on fire. So he first put inside of Moses this fire of frustration, of anger, of being so unsettled in what he witnessed that when the call came to him, he would be likely to act on it. So I would not discount the frustration and just say two things. One, that is an amazing thing. And it could be the entrance that God is placing in your heart to get you to be able to do something when that thing becomes clear. It's unlikely that we will move into a direction until there's a burden. So what is God calling you to do? I think you need to answer two questions. One, what is a burden? And two, what are the open doors? So those two things for me have defined what calling is, even in terms of church planting and different things. I saw an amazing neighborhood of Harlem. I grew up in love with Harlem. I grew up in New York, and there weren't enough churches that were reaching people like me. And that just pissed me off, man. I would be just so mad. Like, why aren't there churches that would talk to people normally and do these different things? And there's amazing churches in Harlem. So I'm not saying that we're the only thing at all.
But not enough. Yeah.
There's not enough. So that burden really made me angry. And that when the door became open, I was willing to quit my job and to walk into a great deal of uncertainty, not because of just a vision, but because of a frustration. So that's one thing. The frustration is a really good thing, that God might be using this to simmer in your soul to prepare you for what's next. The second thing I would say is, welcome to the party.
Mm-hmm.
We've saved a seat for you. Black people,
sorry we're late. So
yeah.
So yeah.
To be, James Baldwin says to be Black and to be semi-conscious is to be in a state of almost rage all the time. My whole life I've been frustrated, not with the color of my skin. I love my skin. I love my culture, but just with what that means to be a Black person in America. So I grew up the son of a judge, and you would think that, and the town I grew up in city I grew up in is about 100,000 people. So it's a decent size, but it's not New York.
That's Ventura. So
yeah. So my mother's a judge. She's very connected politically with, the police chief would come to my house for different things. And I'll never forget, one day I was about 17 years old, driving my mother's car, going home, and this cop pulls me over, and I'm 17 years old, coming home from the movies. It's about probably midnight or 1 a.m. And he's looking at me and asking me all these questions about the car. And as he's walking, as I look in my mirror, I look at him, this dude like unholstered his gun. And I'm like terrified. Mm-hmm. And at this point, I'm stuttering like crazy. I can't even talk.
Sure.
And I was terrified out of my mind. Why did this dude unholster his gun? And it's, again, so whenever I see a police shooting, I think to myself what it would be like if I did not receive training from my mother how to respond to cops who they're the ones who's supposed to be in control of the situation. But growing up in me and my household, it was like, well, this is what you do. Hands on the wheel. Don't ever take your hands off the wheel. Yes, sir. As soon as the cop pulls you over, you roll your window down immediately. You take your wallet out, put it on a dashboard. So then when the cop comes, you can say, the wallet's right there. I'm going to grab it. Is that cool? Yes. You grab it. So there's this whole process, and it's very triggering to see a shooting because that could be you. Mm-hmm. The next day, the cop lied to his boss and to my mother saying, oh, I didn't take my gun out. I'm like, dude, so it's his word against mine. So then now also when I hear official police reports of what was said or what was not said, I'm like, come on, these are people. People lie. I'm not saying every cop lies or not every person lies all the time, but that's a whole other conversation. But certainly I respect police officers and law enforcement, all they do for our society.
Right.
But I don't trust the official versions of how everything goes because I've been on the other end of that official version.
Yeah, I've never like that's. I mean, I grew up in a suburb of Tulsa, Oklahoma, in Owasso. I've been pulled over plenty because I'm an idiot, but have never feared and never had a gun unholstered on me, no matter what I was doing. So yeah. And my girls
Every
can go.
black person I know, every black dude I know that has a story like that,
Yeah,
multiple.
every single one of my friends tells the same story. Black, brown, you name it. Other than white, they would tell that story too. And I'm like, my girls can go for a run, like no big deal. Like no one's ever thought shady of them. So I just am frustrated by that and want to be part of the solution in that. And I've got, you have cops in in your church. We have cops
Oh
in our
yeah,
church, and like so, there's great cops and not great cops, and there's great people and not great people. So,
of course.
like, yeah, how have you like help if you were gonna think through like how Jesus people deal with racism, like coach us up. So like how would you help us with that?
The first thing I think we need to do is separate ourselves from our context in order to the degree possible so that we can evaluate what's actually happening. So um, let's replace 2020 America, and let's replace black and white, and let's go back to post-Holocaust not Germany.
Yeah.
So not no longer under the Third Reich, and let's replace black and white with German and Jewish, and just
Hmm.
say the descendants of these the Nazi Party. There's an overwhelming amount of shootings of unarmed Jews. Would anybody take that and say, "Oh, I guess it's just a coincidence that this is happening"? We would, since we don't have, most people don't have a fidelity to Germany or anything like that, we would be able to see those facts objectively. And if you were to look at just the incarceration rates, our criminal justice system in general,
Right.
the shootings that continue to happen, if what happened to Ahmaud Arbery happened in, again, post-Holocaust Germany, and you say there was a grandson of an SS officer who runs up on on a Jewish kid on the street and guns him down, nobody would think to ourselves, well, I guess let's wait for the facts. And I guess there's a really good reason on why that happened. We
Right.
would all be able to see a little bit more objectively. So that's one way to try to divorce the set of circumstances with our love for America, our love for the country, and our trust for it. And when
Hmm.
you put it in a different context, I think it just sounds so ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah. It is ridiculous. Even the months, yeah, of just like again, I know you're saying welcome to the party, and I've been behind the scenes frustrated, and so I'm just trying to help us learn a little bit publicly now because I'm frustrated with it all. So I
Yeah.
hate that we live in a world where it exists, and I'm not like trying to speak condescendingly. I'm like 10,000% less than what our black brothers and sisters and brown brothers and sisters have been navigating. So I just want to help.
Yeah. And I would just say, really, I mean, what I would want for your people is endurance, because most of the conversations I have with people are like, well, what can I do? And most of my answers are, I don't know what to do right now. There are some political things that could change. There could be introduction of legislation that requires, that would make federal hate crimes a little bit more expansive, particularly with respect to shootings of unarmed people, or have a federal review process, or have a federal crime by which the federal government could charge people um, for crimes. And there's a long, I'm sure there's lobbying and different things you could do to introduce legislation. But beyond that, this is a decades long
Yeah.
fight.
So yeah, crazy. And I'm just praying that the generations and the generations and generations that this becomes so crazy that they would think that this happened in 2020, because I think it's crazy now, that this is still a thing, and that our kids, our grandkids, and our grandkids would be look back and go like, man, I hope that they do some things to change this, because it's really starts with prejudice. I think this is stuff that's taught. I mean, and prejudice is prejudging, right? So there's stuff that gets taught in our hearts, and so we were talking even before this, like like this comes from Romans 7. So maybe walk us through like where some of that stuff comes from.
Yeah, so Romans 7 is probably one of my favorite scriptures in the Bible, and I've used it really from my own heart and to teach other people's, since I became a Christian. And Romans 7 is this beautiful wrestling that Paul is having, this out loud conversation that he's having, and he's saying, there's some things that I really don't want to do. And those are the things that I end up doing. And then he says, and there's other things that I really want to do, but I don't do those things. And then he says, well, who is going to save me from this wretched body? Or some translations say it, that he's looking at himself, he's evaluating his life, his behavior. And this is the Apostle Paul, who's written 2/3 of the New Testament, who has some of the strictest personal ethics that you'll read about in the entirety of Scripture. And yet, when Paul looks at his heart, he sees that there is a divide between the things that he wants to do and the things that he actually does. With respect to racism and prejudice, I've still yet to meet a person who says that this is something that they personally struggle with. And most of the time, the reason they let themselves off the hook, and the reason that you might let yourself off the hook, is because you don't want to do that. Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot of stuff that I don't want to do that I end up doing. I don't want to get mad at my kids. Anger runs in my family. It's been, there's been some traumatic stuff that's happened in my family for years. And my grandfather was very violent towards his wife and to my dad. And my dad had a lot of anger in his life, and he was never nearly as bad. He never hit my mother, anything like that. But my father was a very angry man. He passed down a lot of that to us. And I remember when I first had my son, my oldest son, I said, I'm not gonna respond to him in anger like my dad did. I hated that when my dad did that to me. It broke me when he did that. Mm-hmm. And yet, when it's, when we've listened to the Kids Bop version of Old Town Road for the 17th time in a row, and he won't eat his freaking vegetables. I'm like, dude, just one piece of broccoli, eat it, please. And I've seen myself a dozen times really yelling at him and anger coming out of me. And one time, I was so tired and I ended up erupting at him and yelling at him. And he's 3 or 4 years old crying. And I'm like, man, I'm just the worst. I can't believe I did this. Now, Jordan Rice did not express it. I know how bad it is. I know how negatively it affects people, and I still do it.
Yep.
Many people know how bad racism is. They know how bad prejudice is, but it's still there. Yep. You can't evict it based on your willpower to just say, that's a bad thing, I don't want it. And I think the first step really is for people to take an honest assessment of their lives and to not jump so quickly to the conclusion that I don't have a racist bone in my body.
Yeah, I would just want to look at you, Jordan, and say like, need to repent. Like I've had prejudice thoughts growing up. I grew up in small town Oklahoma. I had black, brown on all of my teams that I've ever been on. But I have grown, I was taught from my upbringing that there is some skepticism around people of color. So it wasn't like explicitly said, it was just kind of inferred. And so I've had to like, man, I don't want that in my heart. My girls never have had that in their heart, and I don't want that for the next generation. So I just want to tell you, like, dude, I want to be part of the solution, and I repent, and I'm sorry. I'm asking for forgiveness. I know that, we're friends. So this is a long conversation that we've had, and I view you as a leader of me and for somebody that I trust and look up to. So I'm trying to figure it out and help like mission and help our churches, like, let's get there together. And just be able to own it and say like, man, the problem is me. And I want to help like get that out of my heart, or let God get that out of my heart, and then own it when I do it, and then not stand for it when it happens around me.
Yeah. One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot recently is this concept of, how deeply entrenched America is in racism. So 2/3 of the time since when America was colonized, 2/3 of that time has been slavery and Jim Crow. So assuming that the last 60 years was amazing, and it definitely was not amazing. Right. Assuming it wasn't perfect, then still the vast majority, actually no, it's upwards over 70% of the time since this country has been colonized was under slavery or Jim Crow. If you think about what kind of legacy does that lead, and one of the most helpful ways I think about this is really, it's in the water. And when you had the Flint water crisis with the all the lead poisoning that was happening, people were, getting lead poisoning, and doctors were so concerned, and pediatricians were so concerned. And, a lot of times we'll pay attention to the, to the faucet and, the handle and how things coming out. You can change that faucet 600 times. The faucet doesn't matter. It's really the source. Mm-hmm. And until there's an uprooting of some really deep stuff, you can change the faucet 100 times and go to Lowe's and get something that's chromed out. Yep. So I think for America, what we do is we rush with the race conversation, we rush to faucets when we need to be talking about the source.
Yeah, I've been reading a book called Upstream,
Hmm.
and there's a the like what America tries to get better at. We try to fix all the downstream problems,
Mm.
but what's going on upstream? Like if we can fix those problems in a creative way, then it impacts the whole stream. So that's exactly what you just said. You would love that book. Um, I would. It's like I think even as a church, like we sometimes it's like we're not like I would say mission would know where our hearts are on that there's no room for racism in the heart of any believer. And that's been said multiply. We've lived that out, all that kind of stuff. Hopefully mission people would agree with that. But I would say like help us like where has white pastor people like hurt like you in this conversation. So like help
Hmm.
me like give me the opportunity to own what I need to own from that, and
Yeah.
give me the encouragement of like what would be helpful.
So one thing I want to say is something is always better than nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So any attempts are better than no attempts. And I think in general, we stumble our way forward. I don't think of progress as a linear thing. That's American Industrial Revolution version of life.
Right.
It's not, we don't reproduce car doors when we're talking about the work of our souls. It's deep, long work. So the things that you guys have done, I always appreciate everything, even if they're a little bit misguided,
Sure.
because I know the place that they come from is genuine, and I know that we will stumble forward together towards progress. That being said, um, I would put I would put racism back in the category of pornography or other addictions. That is there room for porn in the heart of a believer? No, there shouldn't be. I mean, we have the Holy Spirit living inside of us. How could we consume these images? And I've struggled with porn for well over a decade of my life, and I know what that struggle and that addiction feels like. Was there room in my body for that? Was there room in my spirit and my soul? No, it was repulsive to God, but I struggled with it for a decade.
Right.
So I think what hurts is overly simplistic paradigms and statements that make people feel more at ease than what is really happening. So I would say there's technically theologically should people have racism? No, they definitely shouldn't. It's a sin. It disrespects the image bearers of God. That
Absolutely.
being said, so many people still have it, and I think we need to normalize a place of. I think we need to have a lot more conversations about shame and what it feels like to be ashamed of something that you're doing or feeling. And I don't know that we move forward in this conversation until we really have a good, robust understanding of what shame is and what shame does to us. Shame makes us deny everything that makes us feel shameful, and I think that leads to kind of running towards the finish line when the gun just went off and we're just starting out the race. So I would say definitely need to normalize shame, and we need to really have longer, more honest conversations as a church about what this looks like. Being in this pandemic right now is actually a really great opportunity to understand this. Wherever you see the coronavirus popping up, and we live in New York City, so it's obviously all over the place,
Right.
there has been someone who brought it there. That person may be an asymptomatic spreader, but they had it. They absolutely had it. And if you don't see any cases, it's because nobody had it. In America, if you think about all of the injustices that happen based on skin color, you see these outbreaks happening all over the place, but yet people don't acknowledge and own that it's alive and it's thriving and still spreading in our midst. So I think even looking at this pandemic and thinking about how things spread, whenever you start to see pop-ups like Ahmaud Arbery, which is a graphic one, um, it's because there are spreaders of this. There are churches that coddle this ideology. There are jokes that are told in barbershops and wherever about things that people just kind of laugh off. The disease is still there, growing and thriving, and we shouldn't just wait for the big explosive spread before we do something about it.
Yep.
So, Mike, we were talking about Ventura County, and there's a lot fewer cases that are happening, and praise God, it feels like it's at least where you guys are at right at this moment, at the moment of this recording. It feels like it's somewhat manageable, and your hospitals are not overwhelmed. You should not wait until there's 700 deaths a day before you say, you know what, let's do something about it. Don't wait till it's like miserable. We should do things well before someone gets gunned down in the street. When you start, the initial phases of when something needs to be done is well earlier, like when there's jokes being told or, any of the other microaggressions that happen. On college campuses, liberal college campuses, conservative college campuses, where if you have an African American sounding name, your professor, who are supposed to be the most progressive people on the planet, is significantly less likely to take you on as a teacher's assistant. So there's all of these microaggressions, much smaller things that we need to pay attention to.
Man, that's so good. Man, there's a lot in this call, so that's been helpful. I probably would just ask, you know, for me, of I want to open the door, and the door's been open, but like when help is needed, or we mission, or I am silent, or not, or too silent, or whatever, or off on tone, or whatever it is, I would want, you know, you to feel free. I need the permission. I need to, like, you to feel the permission to tell me the truth and love, because my heart is that this would be eradicated. So I hate it, and I hate what it's done. I don't hate it. I'm obviously not felt the impacts of it, but I hate
Yeah,
what it does to people that I love in a country that I want to see this be gone from. So,
yeah,
um, I just want to give you the freedom to speak truth when you need to my life and our church, and like help us get there. So, um, man, I would talk to you forever. So I don't know why we waited this long to do that. That's my bad. So it's on me. Forgive me. Um, what any like last, if you were just like a closing thought. So, you know, Ventura County, it's very low percentage of African American, but it is very high percentage of black, or brown and white. And
hmm,
then there is African American people here as well. Our mission is a beautiful expression. I love it, of how our community comes together. So I'm not saying we got it all figured out. I would not put us in the category of having it figured out, but I do think it's something that God has like woven a pretty cool um, group of imperfect people together that come from all different kinds of backgrounds. So anything that you just would say, closing thought to us as a church, or anyone else that's listening, that's trying our best to get this out of our hearts, or maybe an encouragement of action, or whatever. Any closing thought, you can have it.
yeah,
Closing
that's good.
argument, sir. Closing argument.
Yeah, that's great. Two things I would say. One I would say is don't look away, um, and don't look away at how bad these things are. And if you're maxed out emotionally with the pandemic and everything else like that, obviously, you know, you don't want to overburden yourself, but spend some time thinking about this. So by the time it becomes a national story, it's happening so many times, maybe not obviously gunned down in the middle of the street, but there are so many instances of racism that are happening every single day. And don't look away from all of the things that are happening. Brian Stevenson is a phenomenal writer and speaker and just attorney. He has an organization called the Equal Justice Initiative. He's written a book called Just Mercy. He has a movie as well um, about it. And I would go on his website and think about all of the things that he talks about. And he's a really critical thought leader to follow, and speaks about just the horrors of what it is. He has a museum in Alabama, I believe, the Lynching Museum, which was dedicated to the thousands of people who were lynched during the Jim Crow era. And I don't look at these things on a daily basis, or often or at all, because I can't take it emotionally. But I would encourage you to read a lot more about the dark side of history in America. The way that most of us, the vast majority of us, were taught history in America is from the side of the oppressor. And they're going to leave out details that are very pertinent information, because I think shame does something to us where it makes us suppress and deny things that are really helpful pieces of information. But just to be aware of how present these situations are. And it doesn't, it's not just the gun down on the street. These are like good, nice people who think that they're doing good things. So I'm an attorney, and I did juvenile delinquency defense law for about 7 years. And two quick cases that I'll talk about. One case, identical circumstances, two different people. One was a kid who brought a BB gun to school. He was getting beat up, little scrawny kid. He decides to take his BB gun to school to scare off the kids who were trying to beat him up. We get to court. It was his first offense. I said, Judge, he's a little scrawny kid. He got beat up. He's an idiot. Let's bring him in. Let's scare him a little bit. But he doesn't deserve to, to have this. It's his first offense. He's never been arrested or in trouble before. No reason to take this case further. Judge says, she turns to the county attorney, asks him what he thinks. He says, that's fine. Bring him in. We'll scare him. And, they dismiss the case. A couple months later, same set of circumstances, same county attorney, same judge. Kid brought a BB gun to school, different school, and first offense. It's a judge, stupid kid, bringing a BB gun to school, keeps getting jumped and teased. So made a dumb mistake. It was in his book bag. He didn't even take it out. County attorney says, Judge, we cannot allow this type of behavior to go on, because if we let it go on unpunished, it's going to just cause a complete lack of collapse of our safety and all these different things. And long story short, they tried to give the kid 2 years in juvie. One kid was white, one kid was black. I'll let you guess who was who.
Mm-hmm.
So even the way, I mean, that's never going to make the news, but this is happening like every single day.
Systemically, yeah.
Yeah, this is happening every single day. And people look at the prison system and say, well, they shouldn't commit crimes. Well, white people are committing crimes at a higher rate. The drug offenses, for sure, they're using way more drugs than black people do, and they're still way underrepresented in terms of actually going to prison. So there's so many injustices that are happening every single day, and I would spend some time really reading and thinking about what this is happening. There's a book called The New Jim Crow, which is a really good one to kind of expose some different things.
We'll link both of these, the books you just mentioned. We'll put them down, and website. So I would like, my encouragement to Mission, Jordan, is like anybody that raises up like defensively in this like conversation, like, well, and wants to give, like come back defensively with like, well, but blah, 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 blah. I'm like, that's the problem. So there's like, don't like, we need to sit with the problem for a while of like, what is it in our system? What is it in our hearts that wants to prove that it's not there, when like just do the numbers and just watch the news and it's there. So we don't need to say that it's not there. Like that actually frustrates me more. Like let's get into what's going on in our hearts that feels like we need to defend stats of what you just said. So because I don't want Mission to be there. I want Mission to go like, man, if that's true, and I know that it is, but if that's true, what is wrong? And I need to do some work to sit and look at that for a while, like you were saying. So
yeah, and I prefer an argument over apathy. The person I'm really scared about watches and says, "Oh, okay."
yeah, man, yeah, that's good. Yeah. Um, well, Jordan, I love you. I think the world of you. I respect you a ton. I think you're a phenomenal leader, phenomenal teacher. Love your family. I love your church. I love how God has positioned you uniquely. So anything that we can do, that I can do to help or be next to you or help support you or encourage you, whatever we need to do, we're in. So I love you, man.
Love you too, bro.